Judge Jameson had always been known for his sharp tongue and condescending attitude towards those who appeared before him in court. But on this particular day, he had met his match in Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Crockett had been summoned to court to testify in a case involving a local businessman who had been accused of embezzlement. As she took the stand, Judge Jameson looked her up and down, a sneer spreading across his face. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below and please like the video, thank you. So, Congresswoman, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, I'm sure you're aware that you're not above the law despite your illustrious position. Crockett's eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched in anger, but she kept her cool, knowing that she had to remain composed if she was going to get through this testimony. I'm aware of that, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. But I'm also aware that I have a right to be treated with respect in this courtroom. Judge Jameson snorted, rolling his eyes. Oh, spare me the drama, Congresswoman, he said. You're not some kind of victim here. You're a witness, and you'll be treated like one. Crockett felt her anger boiling over, but she kept her cool. She knew that she had to stay focused if she was going to get through this. But then, Judge Jameson made a fatal mistake. He leaned forward, a sneer on his face, and said, You know, Congresswoman, I've always wondered how someone like you managed to get elected. You're not exactly the most intelligent person, are you? That was it. Crockett had had enough. She stood up, her eyes blazing with anger, and said, That's it, Judge Jameson. I've had enough of your condescending attitude and your sexist remarks. You're not fit to sit on this bench, and I'm going to make sure that everyone knows it. With that, she turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving Judge Jameson stunned and speechless. But Crockett wasn't finished yet. She went straight to her office and began making phone calls, gathering evidence and building a case against Judge Jameson. She contacted other witnesses who had been treated unfairly by the judge, and she gathered documents and records that showed a pattern of abuse and misconduct. Within days, Crockett had built a damning case against Judge Jameson. She presented her evidence to the authorities, and soon, the judge was facing charges of misconduct and abuse of power. As the news of Judge Jameson's arrest spread, the community was shocked and outraged. How could a judge, someone who was supposed to uphold the law and protect the rights of citizens, behave in such a way? Crockett's retaliation against Judge Jameson had sparked a national conversation about the need for accountability in the judiciary. It had also sparked a movement to reform the way that judges were appointed and held accountable. As for Judge Jameson, he was facing serious consequences for his actions. He was suspended from the bench, and he was facing the possibility of disbarment and even criminal charges. Crockett, on the other hand, was being hailed as a hero. She had stood up to a powerful judge and had fought for justice, even when it was difficult and unpopular. As she looked back on the events of the past few days, Crockett knew that she had made a difference. She had shown that even the most powerful people could be held accountable, and she had inspired others to stand up for what was right. And as for Judge Jameson, he would never forget the lesson he had learned. Never underestimate the power of a determined woman like Jasmine Crockett. As the news of Judge Jameson's arrest spread, the community was shocked and outraged. How could a judge, someone who was supposed to uphold the law and protect the rights of citizens, behave in such a way? Crockett's retaliation against Judge Jameson had sparked a national conversation about the need for accountability in the judiciary. It had also sparked a movement to reform the way that judges were appointed and held accountable. As the days went by, Crockett became a household name. She was hailed as a hero and a champion of justice. She was interviewed on TV, radio, and podcasts, and her story was shared on social media platforms. But despite all the attention, Crockett remained humble and focused. She knew that her work was far from over. She had exposed one corrupt judge, but she knew that there were many more out there. She began to work with a team of lawyers and activists to build a case against the judiciary. They gathered evidence of corruption, misconduct, and abuse of power. They interviewed witnesses, whistleblowers, and victims of judicial abuse. As they dug deeper, they discovered a web of corruption that went all the way to the top. They found evidence of judges taking bribes, fixing cases, and covering up crimes. Crockett and her team knew that they had to take their findings to the authorities. They presented their evidence to the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Supreme Court. The response was immediate. The FBI launched an investigation into the judiciary, and several judges were arrested and charged with corruption. The Department of Justice launched a review of the judiciary, and several judges were removed from the bench. The Supreme Court launched an investigation into the allegations of corruption, and several judges were censured or removed from the bench. Crockett's retaliation against Judge Jameson had sparked a national movement to reform the judiciary. It had exposed corruption, misconduct, and abuse of power. It had brought about accountability and justice. As Crockett looked back on the events of the past few months, she knew that she had made a difference. She had stood up to a corrupt judge and had fought for justice, even when it was difficult and unpopular. She knew that there was still much work to be done. There were still many corrupt judges out there, and there were still many victims of judicial abuse. But she was hopeful. She knew that she had inspired a movement to reform the judiciary and to bring about accountability and justice. And she knew that she would continue to fight for justice, to fight for accountability, and to fight for the rights of all citizens. As she walked out of her office, Crockett was met with a surprise. There were hundreds of people gathered outside, holding signs and banners. They were cheering and chanting her name. Crockett was taken aback. She had no idea that so many people would turn out to support her. But as she looked out at the crowd, she saw something that gave her hope. She saw people from all walks of life, people of different ages, races, and backgrounds. She saw people who were united in their quest for justice and accountability. And she knew that she was not alone. She knew that there were millions of people out there who were fighting for the same thing. As she stepped up to the microphone, Crockett's voice rang out across the crowd. "We will not be silenced," she shouted. "We will not be intimidated. We will fight for justice, and we will fight for accountability." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Crockett knew that she had found her calling. She was a warrior for justice, and she would fight for it until the day she died. And as she walked away from the microphone, Crockett knew that she had only just begun. She had a long journey ahead of her, a journey to reform the judiciary and to bring about accountability and justice. But she was ready. She was ready to fight for justice, to fight for accountability, and to fight for the rights of all citizens.